Welcome to Wizards of the Tower.
Roleplay.
In this episode, we're going to be talking about heroic, memorable character deaths. And sometimes unmemorable ones. Welcome to Wizards of the Tower.
Roleplay.
And we're going to talk about heroic, memorable character deaths, and sometimes even unheroic character deaths, and sometimes how they can affect the group with emotion. So, recently watched a clip of Critical Role episode 91 where Sam Riegel sacrificed his character, Fresh Cut Grass, the lovable robot, to prevent the party from having a TPK, from Matt doing a TPK on the party.
Yeah, apparently he was powered by some kind of energy source inside. And
Spoiler alerts, by the way.
Sorry. But what he did was initiate an electrical assault on his own power source, which caused a tremendous explosion, which luckily was enough to wipe out the villain. 79 points of damage or something against the villain, which I got to tell you, I think Matt was helping everybody along a little bit with that, because 79 points for a villain is nothing. Yeah. Most villains are like 579 points.
200, 300.
Yeah, so, but what made it memorable is the reactions of everybody. Now, keep in mind all those people are actors, all right? And, and it makes a big deal that they're acting, but I think you could probably tell that they were all really sad to see his very memorable character killed and sacrificing his own self to save others.
But you could just see how happy Sam was to do this.
Yeah.
You can just see the pleasure in his face. It's just this big old grin. And everyone else is like, no, no, no. And you can just, even Matt Mercer, you could tell, was affected by it.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes characters will do things like that. It's a good way to win hero points if you survive. But, sometimes characters will do things like that to save the party. And it can happen, where they decide, well, it's better for me to die doing this, than it is to, let the whole party die. It's that Viking warrior on top of Stamford Bridge holding the whole thing back, holding the Saxon hordes back while the rest of the Vikings retreat, that sort of thing.
Or your paladin who fights to the bitter end to make sure that the rest of the party survives so they can escape. He'll try to escape, or they'll try to escape, but maybe they don't. But they're going to be the stand, and kind of like Boromir. Boromir was a very heroic death in The Lord of the Rings, and even though he was faulted, what he did at the end was very heroic. And very memorable and very sad in a lot of ways. Yeah,
and actually if you look at it from that point of view, especially the way Sean Bean played that scene out, to where he charged down the hill and took on the whole orcs in order for everybody to get away, it was almost like a very paladinish kind of heroic death. Even though he'd already been corrupted by the ring, the thing is Boromir realized he'd been corrupted by the ring and decided to make amends. So I guess you could ask, and this is really important, I guess you could ask, does some of that come from retribution, or does some of it come from this idea that a person can redeem themselves from redemption, not retribution, I'm sorry, from redemption, that they can redeem themselves with a heroic act, even if they've already done bad things.
Yeah. So it's quite interesting, to see this and see the emotion of players. I remember in our last campaign we had a dwarf who had been there who died, and it wasn't a heroic death, but when that character died, I could see the deep emotion and sadness on everybody's face, and even I myself felt that, and I even was crying a little bit.
Yeah, that was Karnak, our dwarf. Yeah, he'd been with us from the very beginning. Now, we loved Karnak so much that we put him in a crystal cube.
No, he actually, what was funny about that was Karnak had come across when you guys had been hit by some wild magic.
Yeah.
And he drank from this fountain, and one of the wild magic thing was this liquid cube came out. And when he puked it out, it was this like glob of almost like phlegm. And when it came out, it formed into this cube.
Right.
And then when he died, they noticed not long after that his form appeared into it.
Oh, that's right. So the wild magic thing, because the cube had come from him, when he died, he went into it. Now, the really, really interesting thing is at the end of our campaign, and this was really cool, we took that cube far to the south to the Wizards College, where you had some like level 20 wizards whose magical abilities were fantastic. We took Karnak's cube there, and they were able to resurrect Karnak out of the cube,
Yeah.
and bring him back. And everybody rejoiced because Karnak didn't really die. His essence was in the cube, and he came back.
Right. So that was kind of a thing that I had decided as a dungeon master that, Karnak died, and it was very sad, and
Yeah.
the emotion that everybody felt that I wanted, there was this cube and there was this way for me to do this, even though in my world resurrection and reincarnation doesn't happen, but what I figured is when he puked it out, his essence went into that.
Yeah, yeah. No, and the thing is, you had us, and this is how it worked out in our scenario, our gaming scenario. Delaney had, as a DM, she had us come across a very powerful wizard, and we saved his life, and he was able to, teleport his way back to the Wizards College where he'd come from.
And they said, "Well, you take this," and he says, "Well, I'll see what I can do."
Yeah, and it basically became our friend, and he sort of owed us one, and so we thought, well, will you take this with you, and we show it to all his learned compatriots and colleagues, and ask if there's a way to release him and his essence from this cube, so that his death would not have been in vain. Because although he did die a heroic death, it wasn't a death of sacrifice.
No,
he didn't actually sacrifice his life.
He was the last to move in the turn, and he
Yeah.
didn't get a chance to get out of the monster's attack.
Yeah. And so it was just
enemy's
unlucky
attack, yeah.
roll of the dice is basically what it was.
Yeah. But like I said, I could see all the emotion in every one of my players when Karnak died. And
Yeah.
I even felt it.
Yeah.
It's like, oh no,
Well,
Karnak died.
He'd been with us for,
Since the start of the campaign.
Keep in mind, that campaign lasted 2.5 years. So he had been with us for like 9 months or something already that time when he died. And it was just really emotional.
Yeah.
I wondered, what kind of brought this episode up is I wondered how close people feel about their characters. And when you're in a group and you're a tight-knit group and you've played for years and you've got characters that you really, really, really love, what sort of connection do you have with them that, that might bring people to become very emotionally connected to their characters? Now, I have a character in one of Delaney's games, and hopefully we're going to get a chance to replay this gaming scenario. But I have a character named Niederbeck, who is a cleric. He started out being a paladin, but he was only a paladin for one level, then he became a cleric. Now, Niederbeck is like level 13. Now, I played Niederbeck for years. He had a lot of close calls. And one of the reasons he has a companion who fights for him is because he had so many close calls that I was like, look, I need some warrior help here.
Well, you took the leadership.
I took the leadership trait so I could get a follower who would help fight for me, to like a bodyguard me, so that my character wouldn't just keep dying. Clerics don't
Died, but almost came close
many times. And clerics don't get a huge number of hit points. Now, they can heal themselves and save themselves, but you could also get knocked down to the point where you can't heal yourself, and then you could die. Anything can happen in a game. You could get hit by a giant with a big hammer or something and crushed, and it could be an insta-death.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. So, what do you do in a situation like that you've played a character for years? Well, my solution was to take the leadership trait so that Niederbeck could have a follower who essentially would take the bullet for him. And then he could rebuke death on his follower and bring that follower back right away, and keep fighting.
Now, there was another character death in one of my games, and if you remember some of my other episodes, I don't purposely try to kill my players.
Not all
my
the time.
characters. They're really stupid. Or they do something really stupid.
Or really
foolish,
unlucky.
Or unlucky.
Yeah.
But in this instance, there was a thief, an elf thief by the name of Shadow.
Yeah.
And Shadow had done a lot of pretty foolish things and survived.
Yeah.
Well, Shadow went running off by himself and got cut off by a band of orcs and got sliced and diced and killed. And you know, I could really see it in that player's face, the emotion of losing his character.
Yeah.
And what happened was there was an inn that they were trying to protect.
The inn at Greenfields.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Green Griffin.
The Green Griffin
and
Inn, yeah.
They, the Green Griffin Inn was burnt down, and they
Yep.
thought everyone was dead, and
Yep.
the innkeeper and his family, who they all knew and had many conversations with, and
Yep.
and when Shadow died, you know, they decided that they would erect a statue for Shadow. Now Shadow was not one of those characters that was really loved, but he had been with the party for a long time. And once again, when his character died, I could see the emotion in the player's voice, in his face. It's like, oh man, you know. And there was no way to end that death. There was no way to go around it.
Well, I think what happened is because our group vanquished those orcs, we were seen as local heroes, and then Shadow died during the fight. He was the only one who died. And so, in order to honor what took place there at the Battle of Greenfields, they wanted to put up a statue of him. And so, you know, everybody got together and they put up a statue of Shadow, because he was the one who heroically died. He didn't really die heroically; he was just killed during the battle.
Yeah, ran off to do something.
I guess
Thiefy,
snuck around trying to rob something or something like that. Got cut off and chopped to pieces.
Not robbed, but probably stabbed somebody back and got found out.
You know, the thing is he was a pretty high level thief.
Yeah.
You know, and you'd think he'd have more saving throws for stuff like that, but it just didn't work out that way.
Yeah. So
I think it wasn't that time, but I think he was getting kind of mad or thinking that you were deliberately targeting.
Well, there was another time in another game that character had. Well, first of all, they started off playing a fighter and a thief who had worked together. They were playing two characters, and their fighter had tried to swim down into this well and drowned, and you couldn't get him back in time to rebuke death as a cleric.
Yeah, my character could not get him.
Yeah.
We calculated out the dice rolls it would take to travel through this cavern system to the well.
Yeah, it was a well that was down under, and he swam down and found a hole and swam through and had barely made it there the first time.
Yeah.
And then decided to come back through and drowned.
Yeah, we could not get him back in time because he could drown, yet he was blowing his rolls, and he was dropping lower and lower and lower in his con. And then by the time we got him back, he'd gone so low, he'd gone below his con level.
Right.
And then because it was already 3 or 4 rounds later, we couldn't rebuke death.
Now they did manage to bring that character back.
Yes.
But the character had a curse to them by the goddess of death.
Yeah.
Who basically the character couldn't sleep at night. They would have nightmares, bad dreams. So it was really affecting the character.
Yeah.
And they then they found out from the goddess of death who visited him. They said, "Look, you want to end this? Here's your out. I'll give you an out." And that was you had to kill somebody who was innocent.
Yeah, I remember that.
A life for a life, basically.
Yeah.
And they refused to do it. So that character ended up having to stay inside of a monastery.
Which is really weird.
It was protection.
Because he was a chaotic character. You'd think he'd just go and cut the throat of some drunk in an alley or something. You'd okay, now I'm back to being the same old guy.
Yeah. But that character got mad because then later on they got jumped by a bunch of owlbears and tried to fight an owlbear, brawling it because it was a brawler.
He was a brawler,
which is kind of like a monk without as many powers, and got sliced and diced.
Yeah. He tried to take on an enraged mother and child owlbear, and they just essentially ribboned him into nothingness. That's when he got really mad, and he thought Delaney was targeting his characters. You know, you're trying to deliberately targeting and killing my characters off. Which I didn't see it that way at all. I saw it as you're just doing nothing but foolish stuff, man.
Yeah.
Where in the world do you try to, like, hug an owlbear to death? In what world do you do that, you know? Yeah.
Muhammad Ali versus the owlbear.
Yeah. I mean, brawlers typically do non-lethal damage anyway.
Mike Tyson jumping on the owlbear, trying to bite its ear off.
I mean, it was just weird. And, well, that ended up being the sort of the reason why he left the game.
Yeah.
So we've had a lot of non-heroic deaths in our games.
Yeah, there was a witch in one that got themselves cut off.
Again. I
think we've talked about that in a previous episode.
We have.
But, you know, those are the unmemorable ones. You know, the witch, the fighter. The fighter was kind of memorable in a way that, you know, but it didn't affect the party. You know, you didn't see the emotion. The same with your bard that died in that same campaign.
Well,
got beat up by undead.
Yeah, we were all in a tomb trying to get something out of a sarcophagus.
Well, it was a magical sword, which the fighter who ended up dying had.
He had, that's true.
But the thing is, the fighter also. So the thing is that magical sword was a cursed. It was a very powerful weapon, but it had a curse to it as well.
Well, it wasn't so much a curse.
No.
It was an addiction that made you do good things, I think, and you eventually became something. You
would eventually become a cavalier,
mm-hmm.
and you would. Yeah. But every person who had ever owned that sword had ended up having an affair with somebody noble and getting cut down. So that was where the curse lied.
Yeah, and you didn't know when that was going to happen. It could,
or even if it would happen,
or even if it would happen. Yeah.
It was coincidence.
Yeah,
every person that had the sword had this thing that they became this heroic cavalier and did great things and had a relationship with either the king or the queen, and somebody assassinated them or they died in battle.
Mm-hmm. I think I remember it. I think it was something to where every person who had ever had that sword had died a heroic death somehow.
Yeah.
And they were destined to always die a heroic death, which to me would be like, give me that sword.
Yeah.
I want to play that character. But he didn't want to.
Right.
He didn't want to play that sword. And he was mad again about that you gave him what he thought was a cursed sword, which I thought would be an outrageously cool sword. It was a
great sword because as they leveled, it got more powerful.
I know. And I think it started out being a very powerful sword anyway.
Yeah.
What fighter doesn't want a +8 sword of...
It was not that high. It started off as like a plus one or a +2, and then it became... As it was designed, I had it as they went up every 2 levels...
Yeah.
It would do something else. It would start basically gain levels itself in its own way.
It was kind of a smiting. It was a smiting sword.
It was actually an intelligent sword.
Yeah.
But you know, so the thing is too, as a DM, rewarding your players that sacrifice themselves, like Matt Mercer did with Sam's character. You know, when Fresh Cut Grass blew themselves up, Matt rewarded it by killing off the big bad evil guy.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you know, I think that any DM, if somebody sacrificed themselves like that, it's like, look, you know, we're going to die. I'm just going to go down in a blaze of glory. I'm going to drop this fireball right on myself. Or I'm going to drop this meteor swarm right on myself. Or the paladin says, you guys escape. I'm going to stand here toe to toe. And I might give you a round. I might give you 2 rounds. I might give you 5 rounds. You get out of here. You reward that person.
Yeah.
And you make their death memorable, and you know, and maybe kill off the big bad evil guy because of what that person just did.
Yeah.
I think that's a reward that, as a DM, that you should do or would do for your party and make the death memorable. Mm-hmm. You know, to go down in your history books of Annual of RPGs.
Well, what's that called in the military? Broken arrow, when you call an airstrike in on your own position.
Yep. And
you essentially just try to, you just immolate yourself in the enemy, and whoever comes out alive is going to be the lucky one who comes out alive, but it's a way to sacrifice everything to try to destroy the enemy. Well, that's a heroic death. I mean, there's no way around it. People have done that before. They've called on, bombing campaigns right on top of them to wipe out the enemy because they're about to be overrun or they've already been overrun.
Yeah.
And I think there's been a couple instances where that happened in the Vietnam War and in Korea, and it seems like
World
that.
War I.
Yeah. So, I mean, you'd consider that to be a heroic death, and you know, our world, United States, and European countries have traditions of heroic death, and it kind of moves into our RPG games and our gaming scenarios and our combat too. So that's kind of an interesting concept that Delaney brought up about that. And it's played out in the Matt Mercer game, which is called.
Well, it's Critical Role.
Critical Role,
it was for Dagger Hearts.
Dagger Hearts, yeah,
is the new game that they have that they're playtesting. And talk about memorable. So sacrifice. A great one is Audie Murphy in World War II, who sacrificed. He didn't die, but he got up there on that tank, burned his hands, and stood there with the Germans firing that .50 caliber machine gun at the enemy, and that was very, very heroic for him to do. And there's hundreds of instances of that, but things like that go down in history and in the memorials of history and
that's true.
And war and conflict.
Yeah, but a lot of times heroes think that they're going to die, and it's just very lucky that they come out and they're like, I thought I was going to die,
and they don't look at themselves as a hero.
Yeah, they don't look at themselves like that. They just think, I can't let my men or my companions be killed. I've got to hold the line somehow. So yeah, it's really interesting, and we kind of like to hear from people if you've had campaign deaths like that, or you've had campaign situations in your role-playing game. If you've had a situation like that where it's worked out that way, where
you've had somebody who sacrificed themselves, sacrifice the one for the many. Yeah, I would say in Star Trek. And how did it affect your party, your players? Did you see the emotion in their faces when you've had a character death like that? I've seen it, and I felt it. Yeah. And when Karnak died, I myself felt it. Yeah. But I could see it in every one of my. I think there were 6 players at the time, and I could see it in every one of their faces how that affected them and how sad they just the air. It's like they got hit in the stomach, and the air got took out of them.
Yep, I remember that death. Yeah.
So anyway, we're going to end this episode of Wizards of the Tower
role play.
Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, spread the word, follow us on Discord, and anyway, make all your adventures be epic
and keep on rolling.
Thanks, folks.